I will close by bringing our first panelist. That's going to be Mr. Patrick Rogers from the Belize Progressive Party, who will go into some details and some alternative that we have as a nation facing this current crisis. Please welcome Mr. Patrick Rogers.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. I want to say a huge thank you to the Brother Organization for having planned this meeting and for having extended an invitation to us so that we may come and present our case to you all in the diaspora. Before I get underway, I want to say that since 1981, our numbers have dwindled to the point where there is no way we can save that territory back home unless we have you all on board. But what we need you all to do is to, at least for the duration of this presentation and the other presenters here, to take off that red glass if you're a UDP, or that blue glass if you're a P.U.P, or green if you're a B.P.P like yourself. Because today I stand here before you as an elite Belizean brother. I could make another trip up here to talk about B.P.P, but my purpose here today is about Belize. So I ask you all to accept the information being given to you in humility. As just an elite brother, we do a lot of research and have been trying to say, in Belize, we're going down the wrong road. It's time to press the reset button, recalibrate our position as far as our foreign policy goes, and take this matter to the UN Security Council, which is where it belongs. Having said that, I normally work with PowerPoint presentations because I say one picture tell 1,000 words. So I'm going to have to wing it without the PowerPoint presentation, and hopefully that just, verbally you all understand and deliver the message. But in a nutshell, although they say we don't know what Guatemala will be claiming, which is absolutely true, we do not know. We have agreed to go to court without knowing what we're being taken to court for. All I can do is quote for you from 2001 what their position had stated. So in 2001, Guatemala sent this. Guatemala's present position is to reclaim all the territory of the province of Verapaz held by Belize, including the islands and adjacent sea, these latter having been explicitly excluded by the Anglo-Spanish treaties of 1783 and 1786, and which were not included in the British Guatemalan Treaty of 1859. So, just want to leave it to history. The Guatemalan province of Verapaz is bigger than what Sarstoon to Sarstoon is, so they refer to it as Alta Verapaz. But in a nutshell, what had transpired, as Brother Nouri alluded to, the US in 1850 with the Clayton-Buller Treaty basically mandated England to effectively give up the Mosquito Coast, where the Mosquito Indians come from, to Nicaragua, and give up the Bay Islands, where the Garifuna had first settled, to Honduras. And England, in return, expected that she could just get Verapaz without paying for it. So, in a nutshell, America instructed England to get to the table in 1856. It would be, that would be the Dallas-Claddagh Treaty, was a reinforcement of the 1850 treaty, where America basically said, get to Guatemala in a 2 years' time to set up where your western boundaries are. I know you've been kind of held up by the Three Rapids, because if you notice where the western border, the Three Waterfall, right? It was very difficult for the British to go any further west into Petén, because the Arguas Falls, the Garbutt's Falls, and the Gracias Falls effectively restricted their encroachment further inland. But just as a little bit of history, with the urgence of the US, England got to the table with Guatemala. Now, before I say this, I just need to explain. In colonization time, there were 5 things that were considered normal under colonization time. Of course, the first one that we all know of is right of conquest, where nobody respected the Pope's decision to divide up the New World between Spain and Portugal. So all the European powers in their turn, the Dutch harnessed the wind power first. They were the first one to take control of what is New York was once New Amsterdam. The French came from behind, took it from them. The British came from behind, took it from them. That's what we call rights of conquest. I just have the mic, so I move in on the territory, conquer it, and you effectively sign over, a surrender agreement. Well, there's a second norm, which, by the way, 1798, we, the Baymen, not think that Englishman, Baymen know a term meaning people from the Bay of Honduras. So when Samuel Haynes wrote our anthem and talked about our fathers, the Baymen, he was collectively referring to the Europeans, the Mosquito Indians, and the Africans that were there in the Bay of Honduras. So when the Baymen, not the British, fought the Spanish and won this territory in Central America, they effectively won what they had under their control, under pretty much to the Cebu. But immediately after that, British customs and norms came to the territory, and the British encroachment continued down to the Sarstoon and westward to the falls, as I said. So by the time we reached 1859, Guatemala was so happy to get to the table with England because, one, she figured he would get rid of William Walker, which don't bit the history you need to know about. William Walker, the American physicist who went on a rampage with the backing of President Buchanan, took control of the Mosquito Coast, brought an end to it effectively, and extended their control over all of Nicaragua. He then turned around and started warring with El Salvador in an effort to unify all of Central America. So it took one joint effort of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras army to defeat William Walker, but it was a temporary defeat. He came back to the U.S. and was going back with reinforcement. So when Guatemala got to the table with England in 1859, it was serving their purpose of getting an ally that would help them hold off an American onslaught by William Walker. So in 1859, when they signed that treaty, William Walker had already been president of Nicaragua from 56 and 57. So signing that treaty with England, they knew they were going to have some sort of protection against this American adventurer who wanted to unify Central America. Needless to say, 1859 treaty to England was a boundary treaty, rightly so, to define the western boundary. Clayton Clarendon Run stated the northern border would be where Yucatan end because we hadn't signed the 1859 treaty with Mexico as yet to determine where the northern border would be. But the US and the UK understood wherever Yucatan end, that would be your northern border. They also knew that the southern border was at the Sarstoon River, but what was unclear was where your western boundary was with Guatemala. So I can tell you, brothers, in a nutshell, my being here today is because from 1859 up until December 8, 2008, Belize have always maintained one position that all we need to do with Guatemala to establish our western boundary there, which is to say, map from the three waterfalls come right up and demarcated finally. This is where our western boundary is. Well, brothers and sisters, we got hoodwinked that on December 8, 2008, when we signed on to what we call the compromise, they refer to it as a special agreement. And they're pushing it around, printed up as the Peace Fund. I say it should be a PIECE up here instead of PDACE, because all this document does is guarantee, I'm going to say it again, it guarantees Guatemala gets a PIECE of Belize, all right? Now, why am I saying that? I'm saying that because when they sign on to this agreement, what they effectively did is change one position that we have held true for hundreds of years, that all we need to do is figure out where our western boundary is. This agreement now has introduced one Guatemalan claim, and we have accepted it by signing on to it, of our land, seas, and keys. So that is why, under British custom, the worst thing you could do is to throw eggs or tomato at one of the aristocrats, right? One of the well-to-do in the country. Well, no other than, said the Ellington's law partner, Sharon Pitts, who's a ghost knight like myself, but she understood the implications of this special agreement, and she understood that we were betrayed when our foreign minister signed and gave credit to the Guatemalan claim of our land, seas, and keys. So she threw eggs at the foreign minister veto. So I'm not the first person to refer to our foreign minister as a traitor. I'm actually the second person after his law partner, Sharon Pitts. Now, since 2008, after reading this document, because we never saw it in Belize, we got our first glimpse of this document through the French newspaper in Guatemala, and as always, we have to read it cover to cover before we're able to comment. Well, upon reading the document, the first thing we figured out that, hey, got toilet paper because it needs to be ratified, right? No executive can hold one country hostage or sign one convention or a treaty without taking it to the legislative arm of government to be ratified. So that was the first thing we said, well, hey, maybe we could rectify some of the wrongs we saw in this document at the point it was taken as it should legally to our Senate for ratification. So just on the Libra, and just to talk off the top of my head, this is the Belize Constitution at section 61A2. Here's what it says. The powers and function of the Senate referred to in section 1 are as follows. A, authorizing the ratification, including adhesion or accession of any treaty by the government of Belize, including any treaty for the settlement of the territorial dispute between Belize and the Republic of Guatemala. So you not just said the Senate for ratified treaties, he especially singled out something like this that would involve a settlement of the territorial dispute with Guatemala. So from 2008, we have been calling, based on our constitution, for our government to do the right thing and take this special agreement to the Senate for ratification. The reason they haven't done it as yet, brothers and sisters, is clearly that they realized they had been hoodwinked into signing on to that claim for land, seas, and air. And they are waiting until the last moment to just do things that is norm in Belize, which is to take it to the Senate in one day, just read it 3 times, and pass it and become law, and in a month time we're at a referendum. So we've been trying to explain to the people of Belize, let's not wait until they determine when the referendum is. Let's get all the information we can about what the referendum is really all about. And if there's a way to kill it before it proceeds any further, then let's explore that. So we were hoping that in the Senate, although instead of rubber stamp, just the fear of the Belizean people viewing them, the senators, as traitors, maybe they don't get to pass this thing, or maybe if they pass it, they would have passed it with some amendments to it, which would have introduced the matter of monetary compensation in the unlikely event that Guatemala were to win. But as I'll read from this document for you to see, what they have done is that they have not left the ICJ judges with any option to use their discretion, saying, well, you know, Guatemala, when we're willing to take monetary compensation to settle this dispute before, I believe you have no claim. Yeah, the British never pay you based on Article 7, but I don't believe you have rights to any land in Belize, especially since the United Nations said Belize to retain the territorial integrity. But I do believe you need to be compensated. Well, that option isn't there for the judges, brothers and sisters. The judges, what they're tasked with first establishing if the Guatemalan claim to the territory, land, sea, and keys of Belize has any merit. If it does, they're then being asked to determine how much rights Guatemala would have in Belize. And finally, they're given the right, due to the referendum we would have voted on, we would have given them the right to determine our boundaries, right? To determine our boundaries. So as Brother Noor said, no country has ever done this before, what we've set ourselves up to, which is to place more than half of your territory in front of some judges. And we all know that the court don't take surprises. Not care how tight you think your case. When you take and do some of the research I did, which is to spend some time looking at the Guatemalan presentations, then you realize, you know, we're not too bright, because we have taken up one Anglo Guatemalan dispute that could have been settled monetarily. We have been conned into having the British remove themselves from the table, which they need to get back. But they got out of it. They wiggled themselves from the table. And they left us holding that end of the stick when nobody won. And now without the British might, we can't have about squatters' right, which as I'll explain in a little bit, squatters' right, that one of the claims we have to the territory. But the British were the only one who kind of got away with squatters' right because of their might. So this thing called squatters' rights, referred to in a pretty word as acquisitive prescription, and this next thing called historical consolidation, where there's some big words then they use to say, you know, this is a Belize claim to the territory. Those are not Belize claims. Those were when the territory was under Anglo rule. So under Anglo rule, had they effectively went ahead with acquisitive prescription, which is to say the 1859 treaty, with land title, as everybody said, rightly so, we agree. This is our land title. I have it printed up rough, but I'll show you how then they go around to spend the money they got, and they do the all full color printouts going around as the 1859 treaty. This is our land title. And we say, yes, it's a title, but one title that has some incomplete issues there. If I buy from you, and I not finish pay you, some people could just take all the money you have paid and give back their property. You understand? The fact is that this treaty had one compensation clause in there. The Guatemalans wanted 70,000 after they figured out the cost of the Carter Road. England said that was too much to pay. They came back with a counter offer 2 years later and said, we're willing to pay £50,000. But you only have 6 months to accept this. Well, what happened? The Guatemalans went into a war with El Salvador and weren't able to reach their Congress within the 6 months period. So 2 years later, when they got back to the British and said, you know what, we're willing to accept that £50,000. The British said, I have been exonerated, you had 6 months to accept that deal. By you not accepting it, I don't owe you anything. And therein lies the genesis of what was known as the Anglo Guatemalan Dispute, which could have been settled monetarily. Anyway, moving along, we're still under British control. The British next claim to the territory consolidating it is based on what they call historical consolidation, which is to say effective state management. So they backed that up by saying the 1931 exchange of notes, when we got them to the table to demark the boundaries. Well, brothers and sisters, I'm not here around here. I'll tell you what happened. What happened is the fact that Guatemala consistently had been asking to address Article 7 compensation clause. The British weren't hearing it. Anyway, Guatemala, being a good neighbor, got their boundaries commission, their surveyor, to sign on to an agreement with the British boundaries people to demark the border between Gracias a Dios to Garbots Falls, and then pursuing further up to Aguasturias, because at 1931 now, Mexican border was already known. The 1893 treaty was signed. As the Guatemalans got underway demarking from Gracias a Dios to Garbots Falls, and they kept asking the British, but what about the compensation? When the British wouldn't give them a response, well, guess what happened? What we're clinging to, the 1931 exchange of notes, that we says backs up our claim of historical consolidation. Well, this thing never even passed the Guatemalan president, much less the Congress of Guatemala. All this agreement had was on Guatemala Boundaries Commission signing on to the British proposal to demark those things. And so whereas they went from Garbots Falls, from Gracias a Dios to Garbots Falls, they pulled out at Garbots Falls and never finished demarking Garbots Falls to Aguasturias because the British were acting like them and need to pay still. In that time was when Guatemala said, I will give you £400,000, or you give me £400,000 to settle this matter, but we cannot continue like this. And England never even responded to them. They said, well, how about taking that 50,000 that you had offered in 1863, put in, I think it was 4 or 6% interest to it, and bring it to 1940. England still never responded. So they pulled out of this 1931 boundary demarcation, and they never ratified it, and it never got their presidential approval. So when we claim historical consolidation as our first defense to this type, this territory called Belize, this has an asterisk. It has a clause that has never been completed. And then we grab on to the 1931 exchange of notes as though it is, officially Guatemala recognizing Belize boundaries. They never did. It never reached their Congress. So then two things shake hands. And let me tell you, brothers and sisters, with third claim to that territory, which is our best one, and the only one we should be using, which is the resolution that was passed in 1980 from the UN, because they said England do with independence. Now, like, no, gross foolery. If England wasn't mandated to give away independence, we probably would still be one colony. But after 1975, 76, 77, 78, 79, the members of the UN General Assembly, one who called in an allied nations headed by Cuba with best friend, put their feet down. And so we tired to come here every year to tell England and Guatemala settle a dispute without Belize losing territory, which can only mean find $1 figure to pay Guatemala and pay them to settle the state. You see, if I tell them, get together, settle on the dispute, but when it's done, Belize not to lose no territory. That can only mean the UN members understood that England never did compensate Guatemala, when in effect compensation was a norm under colonization. The US compensated Mexico after fighting a war and winning this very territory we're standing. She still compensated Mexico to settle the land issue. She defeated Spain at the Philippines. She still compensated Spain so that, you know, there's no issue about her taking control of the Philippines and Guam and all those territories. She even purchased the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon in 1804. So monetary compensation was a norm in colonization time to consolidate your territory. And we're saying that the problem is the British never felt they had to compensate Guatemala because they felt they had already given up the Mosquito Coast and given up the Bay Islands, so they should be getting something in return. But Guatemala was like, I never benefited from the Mosquito Coast, I never benefited from the Bay Islands, I need to be compensated. So in 1946, the Guatemalans decided to officially revoke the 1859 treaty and start claiming her piece of Belize. And she said, that 1931 piece of paper under the top vote, that wasn't even in our Congress to be ratified for you to be saying, you know, this is something that you're going to lodge at the UN. Sure, go ahead and lodge it. It never had congressional approval, so it won't hold up in the courts. So when we hear about all airtight case, one, acquisitive prescription, historical consolidation, and then self-determination. Well, brothers and sisters, there's a similar case like Belize and Guatemala between Nigeria and Cameroon, where Nigeria had the same 1, 2, 3, right? Acquisitive prescription, historical consolidation, and self-determination based on the UN granting their independence. Well, they lost. They lost to Cameroon, the Bakassi Peninsula. And the irony of it, brothers and sisters, is that Cameroon was never an oil exporting country. And in 2008, when the 2002 decision to give back Bakassi to Cameroon was finally effective due to UN sanctions coming down on Nigeria, as soon as Bakassi fell to Cameroon, you see the European oil companies sign up contracts and oil start coming out of the Bakassi Peninsula, and now 90% of the oil Cameroon exports is right there from the Bakassi Peninsula. You'll understand why I bring that up a little bit later on. But for now, I want to read to you from these resolutions that were passed at the United Nations, because there's two norms. There's decolonization norms, which the Belize claim this self-determination is based on decolonization norms after 1960. And then there's the colonization norms, as we said, where the British would have consolidated this territory before 1960. Well, these resolutions, if I could read in 1975, the first one that started, I'll just read 1, 2, and 5 for you. At Resolution 3432 from December 1975. At Clause 1 it reads, reaffirm the inalienable right of the people of Belize to self-determination and independence. At 2 it says, declares the inviolability and territorial integrity of Belize must be preserved. Now, as it comes down to 5, it says, because at 4 it talks about the issue between Guatemala and Belize. At 5 it says, declares that any proposal for the resolution of these differences of opinion that may emerge from the negotiations between the administering power, a reference to England, and the government of Guatemala must be in accordance with the provisions of paragraph 1 and 2 above. So clearly, the UN General Assembly understood that the Anglo Guatemalan dispute was a monetary dispute and it should be settled without Belize losing any territory. So, 1975, the first time this resolution was passed by the General Assembly. This very resolution was duplicated in 1976, 1977, 1978. But in 1979, as I said, Castro, heading the non-aligned nations on group of countries about 70 strong, put their foot down and explained to England and the UN body, we tired to come back here to say the same thing over and over, make sure Belize get independence within a year's time. So that's this resolution in 1980, resolution 3520. I'll just read 1, 2, and 7 for you. At 1, again it says, reaffirms the inalienable right of the people of Belize to self-determination, independence, and territorial integrity, and urges all states to render all practical assistance necessary for the secure and early exercise of that right. At 2, it says, declares that Belize should become an independent state before the conclusion of the 36th session of the General Assembly. So this was the 35th session. They normally meet in November and December. So there is where I'm telling people, you know whether England may want to give we independence. They were mandated by the United Nations to give us our independence before the sitting of the next House, the next General Assembly sitting. And they were also being told again to try and settle that dispute with Guatemala without Belize losing territory. So that is good, right? But here's the best part. That we got one gift that I tell everybody. Belize are like the poster boy for the UN. We got the UN baby in such a way, and she understood our peculiarity so much that Belize is one of the few countries, I haven't been able to find another country that got their independence through decolonization norm that has a clause 7 in their resolution that mandated their independence. But let's hear carefully what 7 says. 7 says, request the relevant organs of the United Nations to take such actions as may be appropriate and as may be requested by the administering power and the government of Belize in order to 1, facilitate the attainment of independence by Belize, and 2, this is the biggie, to guarantee its security and territorial integrity thereafter. All right? To guarantee its security and territorial integrity thereafter. That is what is being lost in all this discussion about taking this Belize Guatemalan dispute to the ICJ. Now, brothers and sisters, under decolonization norm, there's something you must understand. Every country that has ever become a member of the UN from it was chartered in 1945 has disputes about where their maritime boundaries are. Their terrestrial boundaries are clearly defined through the colonization norms. However it was, they had consolidated their territories by 1945. And the colonies were also consolidated, except in Belize's case, because England never kicked in monetary compensation. Belize had only asterisk there. But invariably, most countries that were given independence through decolonization norms, the territories were already consolidated by their colonial masters to the point where boundaries were known. Belize was no exception. So, in our case, since the UN chartered our independence, we have never, ever kicked in this Article 7, right? Today, we're saying we want to scrap the road we're going down, and the road we're going down, brothers and sisters, was based on Article 33 from the United Nations Charter. When the UN was chartered, they have their articles, what they're supposed to follow. There's 2 chapters that are very relevant to the Belize Guatemala discussion. The first one is chapter 6 that is called Pacific Settlement of Disputes. So this is saying that me and my neighbor, they live peacefully for real. And not just a happy smile kite on me on my shoulder with one gun on my side, where they say and tell me smile for the camera, which is the analogy I use that they're doing to us today. Because we're going around with them hugging up like Kumbaya, my Lord, and these brothers have effectively annexed our island in Sarstoon and effectively are occupying the northern portion of that river. So no, we are not living under peaceful time with Guatemala. And no, we do not need to be going down one road that you only reach when you're under peacetime. So if I could read you Pacific Settlement of Disputes, Article 33(1), it says, the parties to any dispute, the continuance of which is likely to endanger the maintenance of international peace and security, shall first of all seek a solution by A, negotiation, B, inquiry, C, mediation, D, conciliation, E, arbitration, F, judicial settlement, G, resort to regional agency. There's a list of ways you go about negotiating when you have peacetime with your neighbor. If all of them they fail, then they recommend judicial settlement, right? So we ended up at the ICJ because heads of agreement failed, Ramphal Reichler failed, all these other attempts at bringing a settlement peacefully failed. So the OAS recommended, well, Guatemala suggested to the OAS, and the OAS picked up on it and recommended, yes, Belize, look like when you can't reach one settlement, let's go to judicial settlement at the ICJ. So we were reaching the ICJ based on Chapter 6, Pacific Settlement of Disputes. Today, as Brother Hubert will attest to, because he was in one of the boats with myself in August of last year, when we attempted to circle the Sarstoon Island, and we had to face bigger boats from the Guatemalan Navy, literally pushing us away and telling us we cannot proceed the southern channel of the river and circle that island. It was not one good feeling, I'm telling you, it was not. But we understood that someone had to make people realize this is the reality on the ground. It doesn't matter what the foreign minister is saying, doesn't matter what the prime minister is saying, that it's peace with Guatemala, Kumbaya, my Lord. Nothing like that could be true. If any of you all can make one trip like Brother Hubert will take the trip the next time we'll go, I know he always fly down for the trips. You all will experience the reality on the ground. And when you do, accept no prime minister or prime minister to tell you, oh, no, annexation, oh, no, occupation, because you would have experienced one bigger military force coming at you and telling you you cannot proceed down that river. That river is an internal river to Guatemala. You hear the words they use, an internal river. And that their position now is that the border is on the banks of the Sarstoon. So we do not belong in the Sarstoon River. That is our reality, brothers and sisters, and that is occupation. And the island has been annexed. So we're saying, we're not under peaceful Pacific times anymore with our neighbor. We're under war with Guatemala because they're in possession of our territory and they don't intend to give it up. They tell us they will hold on to it until the ICJ settles the matter. Hear how that gone? Until the ICJ settles it, I will hold on to it. That's a scary thing, brothers and sisters, because if we go on yes to the ICJ, it could take 8 to 10 years before it finally reaches, the judicial ears of the judges. In that time, Guatemala might get a monkey river. Who knows? Definitely past the mash. but they're effectively showing they're controlling this territory. And they're showing the world that Belize does not have the wherewithal or can come up with some plan as to how to take back what effectively Guatemala is controlling. So this is why we're saying we need to now change gear. We need to recalibrate our position, and we need to call in the United Nations Security Council, not by way of 33-1, which is what we were referring to from 2008, when we said, even if you're confused, Belize, just vote no to the ICJ referendum if it reaches there. Just kill it, because something will have to happen after it is no longer an option. And what will happen will be to our advantage, because then Guatemala, who they claim, we not claim them, would have had to seek the air of the UN Security Council. And we're saying, that is where we want this thing to be, at the UN Security Council, where they will be mandated by their resolutions that they passed, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, and 80. They will be mandated to ensure Belize retain territorial integrity. So we are not putting our territory at risk in the presence of the UN Security Council. We are putting more than half our territory at risk through litigation whenever certain at the ICJ option through 33-1. So we're saying, yes, we wanted it to reach the UN Security Council. And we were following due process, educating our people as to why you shouldn't accept this special agreement and vote no in the ICJ referendum. And then we will reach the UN Security Council. Today, our position has changed. Since August, we've been trying to tell Belizeans, you know what? There is Article 39. Article 39 falls under Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is entitled Action to Threats to the Peace. So the United Nations have a set of articles under Chapter 7 now, not Chapter 6, which address how do you settle disputes with your neighbors in a time of aggression and threats to the peace. You see? So if I could read you Article 39. Article 39 states, this is 33. Just bear with me a second. I usually have this thing from a PowerPoint presentation where it's easy to flip through. Here you go. Article 39. The Security Council shall determine the extent of any threat to the peace, breach of the peace, or act of aggression, and shall make recommendations or decide what measures shall be taken in accordance with Article 41 and Article 42. So all the articles from 39 right down to 51 governs what type of measures the UN Security Council can use to ensure that they re-establish existing borders when trampled upon. Because Article 41 is for the economic sanctions, and Article 42 is for military intervention if the economic sanctions don't work. So we're saying the only way Belize will get back the Sarstoon Island and get back the northern portion of the Sarstoon River is to go to the UN Security Council under Article 39 that we have been occupied. We have our island annexed. And we need you to do what you have been mandated by Article 3520 in 1980 when you gave us our independence. We need that United Nations organ of the Security Council, not the organ called the ICJ. I'm sorry, brothers and sisters, I'm not wearing the moderator. So, we're saying today that we need to reach the UN Security Council to let them know we want you to come and protect the territory of Belize the way you're mandated to. Patrick Rogers can't do it. None of you all in here can do it. We have elected 31 members to our National Assembly, and they're the ones really that should be taking this thing to the UN Security Council. However, if fact that they have not even given credit to what we've been trying to put out there, and the fact that the media have blocked us out, and the fact that today even the churches were getting hand muddy by the Prime Minister have been singing one singular narrative to Belize. Take it to the ICJ. Take it to the ICJ. Brothers and sisters, from all the history I've read, I'm convinced that we are living what is called the shock doctrine being applied to our homeland. If anyone have read Milton Friedman's writings, right? He's the one credited with the shock doctrine theory. The theory basically states that if you put people in so much turmoil, whether they're wars or, whatever, just create havoc, they will be in such a fear and such, looking for something as a solution, that whatever you put before them as the solution, they're going to grab onto, you see? So, we are being offered the ICJ as the all, end all, and only option to save Belize, right? To get back with island and with river, have to go to the ICJ. You hear England, they said, go to the ICJ. You hear the American ambassador in Belize, they said, go to the ICJ. Instead of him saying, I'm going to pick up the phone and call Washington, so Washington call Antigua or Guatemala City to tell them, give back the island and stop that, aggressiveness in the Sarstoon River, which they're well capable of doing. You and I know that. The U.S. with one phone call could rectify that situation in the Sarstoon River. But why have they chosen not to do that? It's the same reason England have chosen not to do it. Because England will be out of paying one bill. Especially bill would have been paid with piece of real land. Right? You understand the maths? Simple maths. England will still owe as long as Guatemala is not compensated. And brothers and sisters, I don't want compassionate man. After I see all the presentations from the Guatemalans, I'm left to believe that, them damn British men are some chancy people. Because all they needed to do was to have compensated Guatemala the way Article 7 in that 1859 treaty called for. And we would have never entered independence with one Guatemalan, Belizean territorial claim. You see the catch? Anglo Guatemalan monetary dispute, Belize Guatemalan territorial claim. So yes, we are seeing the Monroe Doctrine being applied to Belize, and I'll tell you why in my closing. In my closing, I'll say this. The Mayans fought the big oil company when they went into their Sarstoon Temash Reserve to drill for oil, disrespecting them when our laws clearly call for any economic venture in that territory to sit at the table with the Mayans and the government of Belize. And if the government of Belize want to take under this share, the Mayans then play that, they want for them just share. That is the problem, brothers and sisters, because the Mayans took the oil company to court, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Mayans, and the very day the Supreme Court ruled, our Prime Minister made a statement. Oh, I wouldn't worry about the court ruling. If I were the oil company, I would just proceed and drill. So the oil company continued drilling. Well, the Mayans, the great Mayans, took it to the, appealed it and took it to the CCJ. Boom, the CCJ upheld the Supreme Court ruling. Prime Minister not said nothing. Oil company not said nothing, but then pick up all the equipments, move out of the Sarstoon Temash. Brothers and sisters, check the date, 2007. So, this ICJ claim was brought about because it's easier to have them Maya in a Guatemala control where they don't have no rights and can't ask for no royalties or nothing, and the oil company, which is U.S. capital Belize and U.S. capital Guatemala, we own the same block of land because the oil fields span Guatemala and Belize. So they got rights in Guatemala, U.S. capital Guatemala, U.S. capital Belize. They're licking their chops to get to brothers and sisters, and the only way they can get it is if we set ourselves up to go to the ICJ, where they want to give Monkey River down to Guatemala, and then all know Guatemala, they're just the USB baby down the way, could do anything with. I will close for now. Any questions I could handle later on.